prospective spouse, letting go when God says no. If you've gathered from my caption already, you already know that Sunestis and I, we sort of had, I don't know what to call it, we're in a bit of limbo, so to speak. Yeah. So I met Sunestis in 2017 at Liza's event. Do you remember?
Yep, I remember.
Yeah, we met, and I was just like, who's this guy? He was telling me something about some project he was working on, and I did not understand what he was saying. But anyway, we exchanged numbers, and I think it was the very next year, in 2018. It's about April or March was when we became friends. He was helping me out with some branding work. I didn't know that God was using that to set us up or set me up, you know. And then we just sort of hit it off. We just became friends. Like, I would listen to him talk about God all the time. And he mostly used to do all the talking. I would just sit and just listen, you know. And I was fascinated by the fact that someone would talk about God that much. I'd never seen anything like that before. So, yeah. Yeah, so that was good to me. You know, like it's not like I didn't have friends who knew God, but his case was different. Let me just put it that way.
I remembered something you said back then. I mean, it wasn't a nice statement, but back then when I used to, I would see a lot of things and I would try to explain what I was saying to Dolphin. I literally would tell Dolphin virtually everything I was seeing or everything I was experiencing. And in my mind, I actually thought she understood what I was saying. She just used to listen.
I did, but what I was struggling with was, how do I put it in human language?
Yeah.
To a very large extent, I understood what you were saying, but the English is that I couldn't see myself in it. Let me just put it that way.
I guess so.
It's like, oh, that's what is going on with him, but how, like, it now became a thing of how do I get there? You know, so if part of me was a bit jealous, let me just put it that way. Like, how do I get this where he's talking about God this way, you know? So yeah, that's where the whole thing began, you know. And then before long, as many hetero relationships go, feelings were developed, and then we decided to ask God questions. And I remember we didn't speak for a while, and then I came back and I said that what God told me. And at the time, I was still practicing hearing God. It was just, everything was so new to me, was so fresh, you know. But to know that God actually answered me when I asked, and He said the word that I heard that day when I prayed was be his friend, you know. And I remember calling him and asking to meet up, and then he told me he heard the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And after then, we sort of, what's the English? We sort of settled on the fact that maybe it's be friends now, and then maybe revisit it later. Maybe something will develop later. So we were in this limbo state. If you guys have seen Inception, you know what that state looked like. You know, the uncertainty of it all. And Delphine wasn't having none of that, man. I was sick of that. I was sick of that not knowing, am I here? Am I his friend, or am I more? You know, it was too uncertain for me. So I picked a fight and I bounced. I ran away. I ran away for a while, you know, and I told myself the reason why I was running was because, well, I didn't see it as running at the time. I told myself the reason why I distanced myself was because there are certain things that I wasn't comfortable with, you know. And it's so funny how I accused students of being proud, of being arrogant, of speaking in such a way that it made me feel like he's the only one that hears God. You know how to sound.
So the thing was, I was very particular about. Okay, so if you know me very well, I'm not someone who pretends. I don't know how to pretend. What you see is what you get. If I am not telling you a thing, it's just my discretion. It's just me choosing not to. It's not because. So most of the time, if you're close to me, I would always tell you whatever I'm sensing, because I believe if it's good for me, then it must be good for you. So I just tell you to, right? And so I just pour out everything that was downloaded. And one time, Delphin just goes, but it's not only you God speaks to. So I was like, what? Where is this coming from? See,
I knew where it came from. No, back then, I didn't know where it came from then, but now I know. What happened is there were certain things he would say to me, about the body of Christ, about what God is saying to him, that were just outright straight jacket, straight to the point. He wasn't beating around the bush. He wasn't patty caking anything. It was just straight up truth. And because truth is offensive, very offensive, I took offense to a lot of things he was saying, and I read it as him being arrogant. But
and
now that
I didn't even know you were thinking this way. That's the funny thing. I just thought my friend was good at listening to me. That's what I thought.
I was listening to you. I was hearing what you were saying, but I felt like you were too harsh. I felt like you were coming on too strong on certain people. I felt like you were doing the most. So now that I have come into my office, in quotes, as a prophet, and I have begun to speak out and not party caking anything, speaking truth. People are attacking me now and saying I'm too harsh. I do the most. I'm talking too much. I'm proud. I'm arrogant. And when I think about what I did to Sunesis, it's like,
oh, so guys, there's this part. So we belong to the same community as at that point in time, and I had to move on. It was time for me to move on. I was a major voice, so in this community, I was walking on eggshells, but I would still speak the same way she said I was speaking. I didn't have any option but to speak because that's what God wanted me to do, and I was a major voice in that community, always trying to speak, always remembering to speak what God was sharing. And then here I was about to leave, and she had a dream, and in a part of the dream, she had to drink. Okay, she was talking to me on the phone. I'll just summarize it. She was talking to me on the phone, and I suddenly appeared to her, and she said I showed up with a cup similar to the communion cup, and there was wine inside, and I gave her wine to drink. This is a very important dream, because at this point in time, we were still trying to see whether there was more to us, right? And I remembered asking her one time if she had dreams of me. She'd had several. She didn't even know she had that much. And so she just dumped everything. So I woke up the following morning and I saw like 20-something dreams of me. I was like, what? So we started to look through all of them. But I remember this particular one that had the communion wine. I think this happened somewhere around the first quarter of last year. I think this was first quarter last year. And then you had this dream where I showed up and I was giving you communion wine. And instantly I knew the dream meant that Delphine was going to be taking up a role that I had in that same community that we belonged to, that I moved on from, and she was going to be filling my shoes. And then when I saw the communion part where she was drinking the communion wine, I wanted to tell her what it meant, but I was like, she attacked me because of this thing. So let me just keep quiet. She'll figure it out along the way. So a while later, Delphine now tells me that she actually figured it out. It's simply that portion of the dream simply meant that how I was treated was how she was going to be treated. So she was drinking the same cup from which I drank. And I mean, I did feel somehow, I wasn't excited about her, going through that, but I also knew it was a training. I think at this point, I could say this, that something that I knew about the two of us, and especially her, was that I knew that if push comes to shove, she would obey God. Right? That was what I knew. I just knew that somehow, if she got to the point where she could understand what God was up to, she would obey God. And so even with all the fights and all the oppositions, you don't want who hears God and all that stuff, I mean, it's not like it was a good thing to hear coming from someone that was close to you. And I believe God was telling me that you are seeing what you are seeing, and that's why you're responding the way you're responding. If they too begin to see what you see and understand what I am showing you, they too will respond the same way. And it's always been my go-to card for every single thing, every single way I'm relating with people. I see all the things you're doing concerning the prophecies, especially the things that have to do with the US. I know that it does not make sense to a lot of people, right? And I know that, I mean, sometimes she'll come to my DM and she'll say, look at what they're doing, look at what they're saying, look at what they're saying. And I'll often go like, if they see what you're saying, they will respond the same way. And I would say that, you remember that a year ago, you were not saying most of these things. So now you're seeing it, and then that's why you're responding. It's just like, if you can see fire, the way you will shout, fire, 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 will be different from people who have not seen that fire. You know, instead of saying, where is the fire? Prove to us that there's fire. Show us that there's fire. You know, so it's always good to remember these things and to keep it in mind when we're relating with other people, because it can be hard. I won't lie, it can be hard. You want them to see what you want them to see, and it's the same thing. Even bringing it back to the subject matter. Friends would ask me, why not you and Delphine? Why not you and Delphine? You guys have a thing about it, this, that. And I mean, how many of them could I sit down to say this is how God is seeing it? You know, how many of them could I sit down? You can't. God doesn't always make sense to the human mind. So even for my friends, I mean, it's not like I couldn't see what they were saying, right? The truth is that even when I first met you, generally, I like the fact that she's very creative and she has this energy to go for something that she believes in. Even though as at that time, I knew she was not necessarily believing in the right things. I remember back then, I was still trying to convince you to change your name from Media Mogul or one. And I just chipped it a bit. I did not want to cause too much friction. I just chipped it a bit because I was trying to tell her that, but God is whatever God calls you that you are. In fact, we all had to go through our processes, and I remembered clearly when I asked God about us, that same time that you said, let's be friends, what was happening with me? I mean, we took 2 weeks off each other. We were seeing each other virtually almost every day. Mm-hmm. Then 2 weeks period, we just knew that we needed to stop seeing each other. That way we could clear our heads of whatever we thought of each other and just allow God be God. You know, and I remembered clearly, I asked God, and God said, be her friend. This is what I said to God. I said, God, I'm not going to tell her what you said. If indeed you want me to just be her friend, you would have to go and tell her yourself, because she will think all these spiritual brothers have come again. They get close, instead of committing, they will now say, God is not saying this, you know. So I said, God, you're going to tell her yourself. So I think about a week later, we now caught up. We're going to a meeting in the community we belong to, and she came to get me. We got into the same Uber ride or Taxify ride, and so we started to go. And Delphine was quiet. She was actually looking towards the window, and I was just looking at her like, okay, because I mean we had not seen each other for like 3 weeks plus. And this was the first time we were seeing each other, and then she goes, and I wanted to tell her what God said, but I was like, no, if I say it, she will think. So I now asked her, like, what did God tell you? And then she said, this is what I was standing here, and she looked away, and she's like, he said we should just be friends. So she was looking away from me, saying, he said we should just be friends. And then I start to laugh because I'm like, it's the same thing he said to me. You know. But now the funny thing was, I need to say this now, I'm used to wanting something that God doesn't want me to have, right? And then I move on from it. But it wasn't so easy for her, and the reason was because, like she said earlier on, she was just beginning to get this hang on this strong intimacy with God. I mean, the circumstances of my life have always put God at the forefront in my life. You get, so my talking about God was not something that I practiced. It was just common sense to me. He's my friend. You know, I always saw God as my friend, even before I recognized him as my father. In fact, it's in the last 3 years that I have had this concept, this understanding of God owning me. Like the last 3 years, I suddenly realized that this guy actually owns me. So, but you were walking into this. So it was a major deal for me to tell God that you need to tell her, because if I tell her, she will think I'm making excuses. And so when you told me that, it was very lifting for me. I was a bit not excited. I was not happy, but at the same time, I was also happy that he said I should be friends with you, because I know that God is very intentional with his words. So, think about it? How many of your friends, guys, for those of us listening, how many of your friends has God actually said be friends with this person? Think about it. Just think about it. It means, first and foremost, God thinks a big deal about that person. That's what it means. So, I instantly knew that God thought a big deal about you. That was a big deal to me. Even though you have not even manifested any of the big deals, right? But at the same time, which is also the reason why, in spite of our differences at that point in time, when you were just like, what is wrong with this one? It's arrogance with this. I just stayed put, And I won't lie, there were times I cried. There were times I cried, because at some point in time, I felt even the friendship, we were losing it. I felt that Delphine is not having any of it, and for some reason, she can't even see me the way I see her. But I just needed to stay. And I just stayed put. It didn't make sense at that point in time. But like as I said, I've been in situations where God will want me to take a certain posture, not to my benefit. So at that point, I would always see that it was not to my benefit. It didn't mean that the longer I stayed, things would change, and then it would now favor me and all that stuff. He said, just be her friend, which also made it difficult, because if you're going to end up with this person for the rest of your life, then the wait is worth it, isn't it? Right? The wait is worth it. But there was nothing beyond the friendship. Nevertheless, I've always had this rule: where God wants to stay, that's where I'll stay. If you want to move on beyond that point. So I used to say that I believe it can help some of us here. I always say that it is better for you to be making mistakes where God is than to be perfect where God is not. It is better for you to be making mistakes where God is. That's where His grace begins to get in and pour Himself in. And the truth is, that's how we were able to weather that storm. And right now,
can I jump in here? So at the point where I told you guys that I was fighting him, I picked a fight, called him arrogant, called him names. I was just angry, and then when I think back on it, it was beyond what I was seeing. I was angry because of the uncertainty. I was angry because I felt like God wasn't answering us. So we should be friends. And what's after that? Do you guys? And I felt like God wasn't really saying anything. He was just silent about it. All I heard was be friends, and that just threw me off. I had just come out of a 4-year relationship 2 years before, where God asked me to leave, and then here is someone that finally gets me. I get him to, we speak the same language, and God is saying be friends. I was just like, I beg. You know what? So I picked the fight and I bounced. And we barely spoke, but I don't know. We barely spoke in 2019. Our friendship was very tensioned in that year because I refused to speak to him. I refused to hang out with him because I was just angry. And the funny thing is, it's in that year, it was in 2019, that I dreamt the most about soonest, and I would wake up angry. Like, why am I dreaming about this guy? Like, I'm not, that's Baba God, why are you tormenting me in dreams? So like, it was really annoying. But I remember, like, at the end of, I remember having one particular dream which was so, at this point I knew that God really liked this guy. It felt like God was fighting for him. It felt like God was trying to prove that this guy is a good person. You had it all wrong. I had this dream where is it my parents or his parents came to my house, or my parents to tell me that Sones is a good person and I should try and patch things up with him. I should be friends with him. And I remember waking up even more angry, like, God, leave me alone. It's not my fault to do friendship. I'm not interested. So I think even when I was having all these dreams, I didn't even tell him. I just carried on with my life as if nothing happened. But then we started to speak again by the end of 2019. And then I eventually opened up and told him that, see, I've had so many dreams about you. And then I sent them to him, and then we started to go through them one by one. I am very happy to say here that I am Sunes's #1 student. We looked at dreams. Oh my God. Most of what I know about dreams, I learned from Sunes's, and I will always say it wherever I go because I'm super grateful for that. I remember sending all these dreams. We went through them one by one, and we're able to discern, okay, this one is about his name, Sunes's name is understanding. This one is about him. This one is about passing up friendship with me. This one is about that. And so we were able to distinguish what all the dreams were, what they meant, And in retrospect, now I can tell you that I have looked at them. I looked at them last year, and I was able to see where the dreams that were revelatory, the ones that came directly from God. That's true. The ones that came from my soul because I was angry at him, and then the ones that somehow my heart just conjured up because feelings, because I was empowered, feeling, because of emotions and all of that. And God was able to help me to distinguish between all of them. So then we eventually patched up our friendship, and then we started to talk again. I filled him in on what was going on with my life. My relationship with Sunesis has morphed into so many different things. It started off as somebody helping me with my brand, morphed into being close friends with him, and then it developed into feelings for one another. Then God said, be friends. We both pulled back, went back to friendship. Then from friendship, now the brother and sister in the Lord. The reason why I say that is because when I look back at some of the dreams I had then, God was actually already showing me that there's nothing more than friendship. He's your brother. I had dreams where my actual biological brother turned into Sunesis, or Sunesis turned into my brother, and when I think back on it, I realized that God was showing me that this guy is your brother, this guy is your partner, and you're going to do ministry with him. But my mind was so filled with, is he the one or is he not the one? Is you or is you is my baby? He loves me not. All of that good stuff. Yeah, brother-in-law. So that's, my mind was full of all of that, But all the while, God was telling me, he was showing me, this person is your brother, but I wasn't seeing it, because I was so full of, I want to know, what is it? Is it yes or is it no? And I felt like God was wasting my time. Father, forgive me. So it's been quite the journey, and there's a lot of wisdom. When I look back, I just thank God for his wisdom, because when God said be friends with Sunesis, and I was acting up and I picked a fight and for almost a whole year. When I look back on it and why God didn't give us an answer as in no, he's not the one for you, he's your friend. When I look back, I realized that the reason why God didn't give us an outright no is because I know myself. Okay, if God had told me no, I would have just cancelled him, deleted, probably maybe not his number, but I would have cancelled him, and our friendship would not have continued. And the things that I have been able to learn from him in interpreting dreams, in developing vocabulary for what I see with my visions, the things I've learned from him in terms of studying the Bible, learning to stretch out words, etymology, all of that stuff, I would not have learned it if I ran away completely. So that's why God didn't tell me no. It's not because God is wicked. I used to think that God just felt like torturing me. But when I look back, I feel like God was actually merciful, because he knew that I needed a teacher in this man. He knew that I needed to be discipled. He knew that I was going to drink the same cup as him. So I needed to be close to him to see what he went through, to sort of participate in it. And so that when my time comes, I will know what to do. PG, my time is here now. People are calling me out. People are dragging me in my comments and in my DMs. People are rejecting me. People are hating on me. I saw these same things happen to Sunesis, and I saw how he dealt with it. And I dare say that how I'm dealing with it right now is because I watched someone like him go through that. So can you see the wisdom in God in all of this? So when God tells you no, It's not because he hates you, it's because he can see the future. He can absolutely see everything, the beginning and the end. He sees where you're at, and he's able to tell what you need at each point of the way to get you to your destination. So God is not wicked. I've been saying these things since the beginning of this series. Ladies and gentlemen, God is not wicked. When he says no to something, it's not because he wants to punish you. He can see the future, literally. Anyway, so I'm gonna dive into what now gave us what was the nail on the coffin that made us realize, this God has said no, finally. Okay.
So I think before you start, I want to say that this part is extremely important because sometimes people think that because you hear God and you communicate with God and He's that close to you, things just go smoothly and easily, and you never get internal conflicts. What I mean is that, so you know what the Lord wants to do. We sometimes think that every member, all part of us, will just suddenly obey.
Yeah.
Right? But what I have come to understand is that there is the flesh. The flesh will always want to oppose even the will of God. It will never be in agreement with the will of God. So there would always be that path, that part of us that feels like, maybe there can still be a way out of this. Maybe they can still. So you would think that because God spoke way back, that's all. It's fine. But I'm sure she's about to. I remember 2 dreams specifically. I remember the bed dream, and I also remember the goat dream, the black goat dream. When God is still speaking, it's because there is a part of us that is still not yet surrendered. So that is the part of the flesh. So even though you're doing the will of God and everything, let me summarize it this way. A perfect character in the Bible is Jesus. That's a perfect character in the Bible, Jesus. Just hours to when he was about to ascend the cross, to get to the cross and to be on the cross, he prayed a prayer and he said, Lord, if it's your will, let this cup pass over me. Still the cup, right? Let this cup pass over me. That was Jesus wanting everything that has been prophesied since the foundation of the earth. The lamb had been slain. In this last few hours, Jesus was about to cancel everything by the flesh. And he was literally saying to God, this thing, I think it should pass over me. One of my friends will say, pass over to who now? So who is it going to go to him? It's not you. Right? So the flesh would always want to resist. Always, no matter how sound you think. It happened with Jesus, it will happen with us, it will happen with the next generation, and on, right? So always keep that in mind. It's not because God said everything just fits in perfectly. No. Many times your flesh will still come and resist the very thing God said. Yeah.
So even though we had carried on being friends, as God said, after the big massive fight, not speaking for almost the whole year, and then we carried on being friends, there was still that ray of hope, like maybe be friends now and maybe something more, so there was still that uncertainty, not knowing what we were, and it was confusing for me and I was sick of it. I remember I had this dream. This was a pointer that God was showing us, but I still had a bit of hope. In this dream, we both lived in a tiny apartment, in fact, like a 1-bedroom apartment, and there was a bed by the corner, a green mattress, I think, green sheets, a bed by the corner. Then Sunesis had a workstation right at the foot of the bed, and then there were these devices, something hooked up to the side of the bed that looked like 2 round windows, like the windows of an airplane, that sort of thing. And it had what I would call like some sort of AC mechanism blowing air on top of the bed. And then seemed like a normal day. And then we had 2 friends visit us. I can't remember their names. I think one was Mobile or something. And she came in and she's talking about how she was supposed to go on a Euro trip with someone, but the person she partnered with died, and that was the dream. And I remember thinking, what sort of dream is this? Like, I don't understand, So I shared it with him, and I will never forget the look on his face. Seriously, I can never forget. he had these worry lines, like, this is not a good dream, And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, how is this not a good dream? Like, I didn't think it was a bad dream, but at the same time, why is it not a good dream? He's like, let's ponder on it for a while. I can't remember what it is that he said, but I think the thing about somebody dying at the end, the lady who died, he's like, no, there's nothing, this doesn't sound good. Does it mean that if we end up together, we will be managing, and not managing in terms of wealth or finances, but in terms of our calling? It seemed like we were comfortable, but at the same time, it seemed like, are we going to hold each other back, so to speak?
Yeah.
Will we be able to feel purpose if we end up together? So I don't know if you want to shed more light on that dream before I move to the second one.
What I immediately saw was that our sphere of influence, which was the bed, right? It was a small room with big bed in small rooms. I remember clearly one of the things that stood out to me was that you said I had built this contraption, this device that could blow air onto the bed, and immediately I recognized that as inspiration, to construct your own divine inspiration on top of that bed. So I instantly knew that if you're very conversant with scriptures, you would know that Bible says there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration, that's the air, the inspiration or the breath of the Almighty gives it understanding. Yeah, gives it life, understanding. So I instantly knew that the circumstance here was God was showing us that if we got along, if we went ahead with our plan, right? It's not like we will have a terrible marriage. No, it will just not be as inspired as spirit inspired as it ought to be. One, then two, the sphere of influence will be limited to just that room, because that room stood out. And I mean, this was why, if you really want to pay attention to that dream, what really stood out was, she said, I remember reading it, and she said the bed was big but the room was small. So you could tell it was ill-fitting for that space. So it meant that the occupants of that bed were actually managing it. And I have a history of this understanding, and I can explain it. For some of us, we may know Catherine Kuhlman. No, sorry, is it Catherine Kuhlman? I think it was Amy McPherson, right? Amy McPherson. They almost came at the same time. Amy McPherson was similar to Catherine Kuhlman, but she was the founder of Foursquare. Now, her mother was supposed to be her, but her mother wanted, her mother was very fervent for God, but she wanted to have a family.
A normal life.
She wanted to have a normal, normal is relative. She wanted to have a normal life. So she told God that she wants to have a husband, and she wants to have kids, and she wants to have all these desires. So she decides to go on and have it. Right? She gave birth, all her kids were sons, were sons. So out of the blues, she said, God, if you will give me a daughter that will do exactly what I was meant to do. And then Amy McPherson came. If I remember the story very well, it was Amy McPherson, not Catherine Kuhlman. I need to check the two stories again, because I read the two books close to each other, so sometimes I may flip the stories. But anyway, so when Amy McPherson came on board, Amy McPherson went on to become the founder of Foursquare. She herself tried to get married. Her marriage was not stable, in the sense that it seemed, I don't know, right? Except God gives us a revelation. It seemed that the mother knew that her own destiny was to not be married and carry the gospel, just like Paul. But she was not ready for that kind of a life, especially for a woman in that point in time. So she carried the burden and threw it on her daughter. That's Amy McPherson. And remember, McPherson went on to do that. So the truth is, marriage can actually affect your calling. All right? And it wouldn't be can. I would rather say will affect your calling.
Will. Entire life. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to pay attention to that aspect. People say don't listen to singles talk about marriage. I say that's a lie. What I would rather say is listen to somebody who understands salvation, because salvation and marriage will go together. So Don't listen to anybody who does not understand salvation. And I mean salvation concerning any topic. So salvation, whether it's business, whether it's life, always look at it from the viewpoint of how Christ sees the world, how what Christ did on the cross. You get, whether it's marriage, whether it's life, whether it's anything. So and so that had to make me, that was the first dream. And I knew that, okay, God is saying, look, I'm not a difficult God. If you guys want to do this, I will still let you have it. But this is what you will get out of it. This will be what will be the outcome. And that's why I told her, I was like, this is not particularly a very pleasant dream. It's not like we're going to die or anything's going to go wrong with us. But we will never come to the fullness. God is always particular about fullness. Fullness will never come to that point. So that was strike one. Yeah.
When did you have the dream about us being in a car and then being sent back?
Oh yeah. So
yeah, that one before I the last one.
Yeah, so I had this dream. Now, remember, God has spoken, right? So the dreams were just emphasis. The dreams were coming to emphasize God's mind. So I had this car. For some of you may know this story of what went wrong with the car, but that's not the point of this conversation. So I had this car. In this dream, I was back with this car, and I was driving, and Delphine was seated beside me in the passenger seat, and we were trying to go. Now this is, the way cars, the way roads are. This one goes straight, this one comes the other way, right? So this way was filled with cars. This way was filled with many cars. This other one was empty. So they were going in the opposite direction. And then I say, there was traffic. There was traffic on this side. So there were many cars here, and everything was next to a standstill. So I see this Lebanese guy in brown uniform, right? He passes us the first time, and he just looks at us and he smiles and he goes on. So he's a Lebanese. I could tell in the dream that I recognized him as a Lebanese man. But he was wearing brown police uniforms. And I knew he was the police. And he looked at us. He just smiled like he knew us. And I waved back at him and I was like, okay, no problem. Then he passes us. All of a sudden, I say to myself, you know what? Let me drive away from this traffic and go to the opposite lane, going against traffic, so that I could quickly rush and grab something. I didn't know what I was quickly rushing to grab. But it was the intention to quickly rush and grab something against the traffic and then return to where I was. And then the moment I did that, the Lebanese guy just showed up from nowhere. The Lebanese police guy just showed up from nowhere, stood in front of the car and said, get back. And I was like, I just wondered, he looked at me with a rebuke on his face. With a rebuke on his face. He didn't hate me, he just wanted things to be done right. So he said, get back. And then I reversed the car back to where we were supposed to be. This was very significant to me because, funny enough, contrary to Delphine, I've not had too much dreams of Delphine. I think I can count them, probably like 5. I think I can count them like 5. And I don't even think it's up to 5, maybe like 3 or 4, right? And they always stand out. So this particular one stood out, and instantly I knew that there was some intention in my heart to still try to find a way to get what I wanted out of this relationship, and the Lord was not having it. So I had to go check why a Lebanese guy. I found out that the word Lebanese or Lebanon means white, right? And then brown had to do with what was it? I can't remember. Someone will need to help me check the etymology. The secret is in the etymology of brown. So I was able to connect the two together, and I realized that the Lord was saying, I want things done the white or the pure way. So he sent us back to join the traffic that every other person was on. And I remember that this was God saying, you're not going to short circuit any of this thing. You guys have to do things the right way. So that was that one.
Okay. Then.
Sorry, I wanted to state this, that this person, someone, I think it was is it Kabura or something? FC Abura, something like that. He says, in our hearing God and download of spiritual visions, we sometimes contaminate them with our own feelings and desires, which tweaks the perfect interpretation. Yes, sir, you are spot on.
Yeah.
Many times, especially if you have a prophetic grace in your life. Let me tell you guys the truth. Spirituality and your flesh can't mix. They can't mix. They can't mix. Walking in the spirit and walking in the flesh can't mix. Every time you try to do that, you're contaminating it. Right? So sometimes you want to finish what grace started, you want to finish it by your own strategy. You want to finish it by your own strategy. You want to look for your way out. Characters in the Bible that did these things were what's his name? Esau and Jacob. The way Jacob took his birthright from Esau, that was Esau paid dearly for it, right? Even though that was what God had in mind for him, Jacob didn't need to go through that route. But you can study that story. Another person is Abraham. God had promised Abraham the child. You get, but him and his wife sat down and Ishmael came out of it. They had to go and create Ishmael with another woman. Why? They were trying to finish by grace. They were trying to finish by works what grace started. God can give you a promise and then you now go on and you can fulfill it in your own strength. Let God be the author. Yeah, let God be the author and the finisher of your faith. Don't let God start your faith and you go and finish it yourself. Right? It's a very dangerous thing. You know? All right.
Yeah, so let's move on to the nail that hit the coffin.
Guys, listen very well. Listen very well. In this dream, I was a black goat.
So even with my dream and his dream, there was still that, are we sure? Are we sure God isn't? You know, like, we're still trying to think and hope. There was a ray of hope somewhere. But then I got this dream, I don't know, sometime last year during the pandemic. In this dream, I was walking with Sunetis and a mutual friend of ours, Ugonna. We were heading toward a building project, like an under construction building that was under construction. And I think Ugonna met us on the way. And as we're heading there, she said, that she'd been trying to do some work there, but the workers there didn't let her. They didn't allow her to do her work. So she doesn't know if they would allow her. That's Sunesis and I. And mind you, out of all the many dreams I've had of Sunesis, we're always doing some work together. So clearly, God was showing that this man is your partner, he's your brother. But no, your thing was reasoning is or I did it. Anyway, so the scene changes, and then this part is so funny. The scene changes, and then I see a group of people who are actually animals. And they seem to be two lines. They queue up in two lines, and it seemed like they were playing some sort of game. They were they had like how do I explain it now? So the game was that one person would go to the front of the two lines and ask a question, and then the people on the two queues will give them an answer. So I was just watching the whole game thing play out. But I also realized that they were animals, but they were also human beings. I can't explain it. Or human beings who appeared as animals.
Animals, yeah?
Yes. Then all of a sudden, I'm with a black goat. You guys, I can't make this stuff up. In the dream, I also realized that I'm also an animal, but I don't know what animal I am. I can't see myself, but I know I'm an animal. And then I'm with this black goat. And then someone passes by, and I stop the person and I ask the person, can I be in a relationship with this black goat? And the person said, check this. The person said, no, you can't, because you are both complex human beings. And then I said, let me go to the front where people are asking questions and ask them if what this person said is true. So I was walking towards that place when I woke up from sleep, from the dream. I remember I sat on my bed. You guys, I sat down and I was eating black boots. I believe that clearly I knew that Sunesis was the black goat because he's the one I was walking with in the previous scene. So who else could it have been? It was Sunesis. Plus, I had all these thoughts, but why a black goat? Like I've heard Sunesis talk about how he's had visions of himself as a black horse, as a horse generally. So I thought to myself, if God wants to give me a dream showing me who Sunesis is, why would he choose to use a goat as opposed to a horse, which I know is? So I was like, I believe I know Sunesis according to the spirit. This person is not a bad person. I am sure of it. I am certain. So why a goat? So I sat on it for a few days. I didn't tell Sunesis because I was a bit scared, like, hope this one will not say I'm thinking that he's evil or something. Why a black goat for goodness sake? So I sat on it for a while. I pondered, I meditated on this dream, guys. I thought about it, pondered, just mulled over the whole thing in my head. And then I just opened my laptop one day and just searched goat scriptures. And most of the scriptures I could see about goats were about sacrifice. So in Leviticus, Exodus, how they would sacrifice bulls and goats, all of that. But then there was also a bad scripture, Matthew 7, that speaks. Is it Matthew 7? Matthew, I don't know. The parable that speaks about the goat and the sheep nations. So goats is generally used for something bad because goats are stubborn. So I just like...
Well, they're actually interpreting it already.
Yes, exactly. Because goats are stubborn, So I was like, sacrifice. And then God reminded me in 2020, in the beginning of the year, I think it was about February, my friend and I did the 40-day fast with Ingo and the Send. And I remember one of the things I prayed about was that God would give me a clear answer about Sunesis. Like, I was tired of this whole limbo, not knowing where we were, what we were. So I remember one day just kneeling on the ground, like in the center of my room. And I just said to God, just in tears, and I told God that, you see, I'm presenting Sunesis as my Isaac. Basically, the way Abraham sacrificed Isaac, that I'm presenting Sunesis as my Isaac. I'm done trying to figure it out. I don't want to use my brain anymore. I'm giving this whole issue to you. Do with it what you want. I remember saying that prayer. I cleaned my tears. I stood up. I went to sleep. And then it was months after I now had this dream about the black goats. So God showed me that, see, you presented a sacrifice, and I'm showing it to you that sacrifice is him. So this is basically the stamp, the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is basically the answer you are looking for. Let him go. In that regard, he's your brother, he's your partner, you are doing ministry together. This is why I asked you to be friends with him, that you do the work together, not in the way that you expected, but somehow, ladies and gents, we are still doing the work together. This life we are doing right now is the work. I remember a few days after, when I figured it out, I called him. See, you guys should just thank God for this man that I have as my friend, because one thing that I respect him for is his ability to put emotions aside and say it as it is. His ability to zero in on the spiritual, on what God is saying, as opposed to what I feel, what I think, what I know, my opinion, all of that. He's able to, I don't know how he does it, but he's able to separate the two. So I remember calling him and telling him this dream, and he paused for a while. And the very first thing I heard him say is, I am the black goat. Where did he do that at? And I found that there are a number of people that would have told this dream, if it were about them, they would not say, I am the black goat. But hearing him say it, even though I knew inside his chest was saying it was something had died. He didn't want to show his emotion. He didn't want to show that it hurt him. All of that was for me. Oh, I'm spiritual. I'm Sunesis of the God. And even though I could appreciate the fact that he was able to outright just say, this is this, I am the one, a part of me was a bit hurt by his reaction, because I'm like, I thought you liked me. Why are you so happy to say that you are the black? Like, relax.
I remember.
Yes, I remember feeling really bad that day, and then eventually he sent me a message saying that, okay, I shouldn't worry, that he actually did feel some type of way, but he felt like he needed to be the bigger person, or mature one in this situation. So I quite understood it. So that was the dream that gave me the final, this is it. God has said no. You need to move on from this and focus on the work that God has called you to do together. That work does not involve marriage, but it doesn't make it any less important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I mean, something I can say, and I'll still repeat it again. I think I gave a hint about it earlier on. Is that this thing called self? We have to die to it every day, every time, every day. We want to experience the depths of God, but we want to stick to our opinion. We want to stick to our what we think we know is true. Let me just put it this way: in walking with God, you can't lean on your own understanding. You can't lean on your own understanding. When God said, "Lean not on your own understanding; in all your ways acknowledge Him," He wasn't. When the Scripture rather says, "Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him," not some of your ways, all your ways acknowledge Him. He wasn't addressing unbelievers. He was addressing every human being that was deciding to walk with Him. We ourselves, So we must always keep this in mind. There is a way that seems right unto a man. It seems right unto a man, but the end is a dead end, is death. So we're not exempted from the standards of God. So it's always important, and get this right, guys. Get this right. We've told you all the stories not just to entertain you, but to say that it's not going to be as easy, right? It's not going to be easy, and I don't know what challenges I'm going to face next. I don't know. She doesn't know what challenges she's going to face next. Even as a prophet, you don't even know your tomorrow. You can't, I can't prophesy my tomorrow. Even as a prophet, I can't. I just have to wait for what God is up to. If He reveals, then I go. So sometimes people think the prophet is the next best thing to God. After God is the prophet. While the prophet speaks, boom, that's it. It's not so. It's not so. It's not so. Most of us, if not all of us, are clueless. We're all clueless until God speaks. And it's also very important that God backs whatever you're doing, so that when things start to go in quote wrong, you can always blame God. You can always say, God, it was you. I heard. It was you that spoke. But you see, if you go in your own strength, whatever comes out of it is you would have to be the one to bear the brunt. You would have to be the one to carry the burden by yourself. So why not just allow God be God? Allow God be God. No matter how complex it is, it's not. Delphine is not the first person I've been in such a situation with like this. And she may not even be the last. I may meet someone else tomorrow, and it's a similar thing. There are people. It's not just in relationships, or it's not just in love relationships. I have met people in business that I thought it was about business, and I heard the Lord say, "This is not about business. You are knowing this person because you're going to help this person perfect their work with me." And boom, that's what happened. So I immediately dropped my mindset about trying to make money from the person to trying to help the person walk with God. So you must always keep these things in mind. It's not we were used to what God can do for us rather than what God can do with us.
Yeah.
So, and the journey becomes an adventure, and you really get a lot. So in closing, I'm just saying, when you're walking in the Spirit, just do everything you can to get yourself out of the picture. If you find out self is actually a challenge, just table it before God. Lord, this is really, really difficult. So sometimes you would have to cry. She cried, I cried. Different points in time, because it's dying. You're dying to self. Nobody likes to die. Right? Nobody likes. It's not fun. It's not fun. So you cry out to God with that pain, and it makes your prayer very authentic. It makes your prayer very, very, very authentic. And one thing I can tell you, guys, the power of God starts to back you. Somehow it just works, because at that point in time, God recognizes you're weak. So He starts to pour His grace. And all of a sudden, you begin to really experience depths of God. Visions, dreams, encounters, miracles. You just name it. It's almost as if, it's what Paul said. it says, I will boast in my weakness, for when I am weak, then the Lord is made perfect in my weakness. And that's the truth. That is the truth. So I'm saying this both as an encouragement, and at the same time as a way to say it's not all gloomy and everything. Glory comes out of it. Glory comes out of it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, with the work that we do together, I would not have imagined that we would be partnering like on this level. I would not have imagined this, but staying the course and actually being his friend, I can see the fruit of it. There's a day in my life that I called him knighthood because he decided to pray for me on this particular day. And I remember just feeling like Timothy that day. Because I had this vision. This is where the whole thing started. I was driving one day. I had this vision where I saw him laying hands on me and pouring oil on me. And I didn't know what it was. So I remember I just called him and I told him that here's what I saw. I feel like the time is coming where you actually have to do this, but I don't know when. And then I think it was when I put out the prophetic word about the blue moon.
Yeah. I remember.
He said, I think it's time to do that. And I went over to see him, and it was so ceremonial. I wanted to kneel. He said I shouldn't kneel, that he no longer sees me as a disciple. I am now a colleague. Guys, oh my God, my shoulders. Hey, 50-50 shoulder pass. Oh my goodness! I felt like Timothy to his Paul. In the letters that Paul wrote to Timothy, there are times where he called Timothy his son, and then eventually he called him his co-laborer in the gospel, and that's what he called him. And he asked me to sit down. He said, if you actually recorded it, he said a few words, and then basically just told me how proud he was of me and how far I have come. How I'm no longer a petulant child and that I have grown, blah, 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 and then he prayed for me. Guys, oh, I can't begin to tell you how heartfelt that prayer was, but I felt the glory. The glory! Anyway, he laid hands on me and just conferred grace, and poured oil on my head. I just gotten my hair done. I had braids and plenty of space in my scalp for the oil to go away. So he poured the oil on my head, and I remember just feeling so, what's the word, new, refreshed, like I entered into something new, and I was so grateful, like, you have no idea. This is born again. So quite clearly, our relationship has really, really morphed. It's metamorphosed over the years. Like, it's been cataclysmic, it's been refreshing, it's been grace imparting, there's been a lot of wisdom shared, there have been a lot of tears, a lot of goofiness, laughing and all of that, but somehow we ended up here doing ministry together one way or the other. And for that I am grateful, like
I am grateful too.
All the tears and all of that, God brought something beautiful. It wasn't the beauty that we expected, but it was beauty.
Yeah.